Welcome back to Aqua Reads, where we dive deep into the world of captivating short stories. I'm here to take you on another literary journey that'll leave you thinking long after the last word. So get comfortable, maybe grab a cup of tea, and let's begin.
The Arrangement. Part 1, The Ultimatum. The corner office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Sultanate Tower, which meant it had windows on 3 sides. And the kind of view that made most people's ambitions seem disappointingly small. Jasmine sat behind her father's desk. Still his desk, technically, though she'd been managing 90% of his actual work for the past 2 years, and watched the city sprawl beneath her like something she'd already conquered but hadn't officially been permitted to claim. "I've decided," her father announced, settling into one of the Eames chairs with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was increasingly negotiating with time. Maharaja had built the Sultanate Corporation from nothing in the 1980s, had weathered the tech bubble and the 2008 collapse and the recent cryptocurrency volatility with the kind of ruthless pragmatism that had made him simultaneously wealthy and friendless. "You'll marry Aladdin before the end of the year. Once you're married, I'll step aside and you'll take over as CEO." Jasmine set down her Nespresso, but served in hand-blown Murano glass because her father had opinions about the experience of consumption, and chose her response with the precision of someone who'd learned that casual remarks in this office could move markets. "I'm not marrying Aladdin," she said. "Then you're not becoming CEO," her father replied. His voice had the quality of someone stating objective fact, the way one might mention that water was wet or that profit margins were mandatory. "You understand my position. I'm 73 years old. I've built this company from nothing. It's my legacy. I won't hand it to someone without the right foundation. Marriage, children, stability. These things matter to board members. They matter to investors. They matter to the world. What matters to the world is competence," Jasmine said. She gestured at the quarterly reports displayed on the screens behind her. "I've increased profit margins by 18%. I've navigated the supply chain crisis better than any of our competitors. I've diversified our portfolio into emerging markets while maintaining our core business. I'm demonstrably more qualified than anyone in our entire organization." "You're unmarried," her father said simply. 42 years old. No children. No indication that marriage is likely. From a corporate governance perspective, you're incomplete. This was a conversation they'd been having for 3 years, since her mother had died and her father had decided that his mortality was the business problem that needed solving. Jasmine could have cited legal precedent. She could have reminded him that discrimination based on marital status was technically illegal. She could have reminded him that he'd fought tooth and nail against similar arguments when they'd been directed at him by misogynistic board members in the 1990s. Instead, she said, "I'll get married." Her father looked surprised. Surprise was a rare expression on Maharaja's face. It made him seem momentarily human, instead of like a force of nature that had learned to wear a suit. "Before the end of the year?" he asked. "Before the end of the year," Jasmine confirmed. "I'll find someone appropriate. I'll introduce him to you. We'll have a wedding. You'll step aside. Problem solved." "Who?" her father asked. "Do you have someone in mind?" "No one from our world," Jasmine said. This part she was making up as she went, but she'd learned to make things up convincingly. Someone completely outside the business sphere. Someone you won't recognize is trying to leverage the arrangement. Someone who won't trigger any of the usual concerns about fortune hunters. Her father smiled. It was a smile that suggested he understood exactly what she was doing and found it amusing. Very well, he said. Find your outsider. Marry him. Then we'll see if you actually have the killer instinct required to run this company. Part 2, The Search. Finding someone stupid enough to agree to a fake engagement but not so stupid that he'd embarrass her required a very particular understanding of the male psychology of opportunity. Jasmine began her search with the kind of systematic approach she brought to everything, creating profiles, assessing variables, identifying the optimal candidate. The requirements were specific: handsome enough to appear credible as someone she'd fall for, stupid enough not to understand what he was actually being drawn into, ambitious enough to agree without requiring excessive explanation, and, crucially, poor enough that the financial arrangement would seem like life-changing opportunity. She found him at a charity event hosted by one of her father's competitors, the kind of event that existed primarily as theater for the wealthy to perform their generosity at each other. He was standing by the auction table looking like a confused angel who'd accidentally wandered into a museum and was trying to work out where the exits were. Aladdin, she said, approaching him. That's your name? He turned, and she watched as his expression cycled through confusion and then into something that suggested his brain was attempting to load and had stalled halfway through. He was genuinely beautiful in the way that required absolutely no complexity of thought, symmetrical features, well-maintained body, the kind of effortless attractiveness that probably made life simultaneously easier and more stupid for him. Yeah, he said. Do I know you? No, Jasmine replied. But I'd like to offer you money. A significant amount of money. More than you're probably making currently. In exchange for something that requires almost no work on your part. He looked around as if checking whether this was some kind of hidden camera scenario. That sounds like something that would be bad for me. It's not illegal, Jasmine said. She was already revising her assessment upward. He had enough self-preservation instinct to at least consider consequences. And I'll have contracts drawn up that protect both of us. But I need you to agree not to ask questions about why I'm doing this until after the arrangement is complete. How much money? He asked. $2 million, Jasmine said. She watched his face process this number. Half now. Half after the marriage is finalized and publicly documented. What do I have to do? Pretend to be my fiancé, Jasmine said. Attend events. Look adoring. Tell people we met and fell in love. In approximately 8 months, we'll divorce. You'll get a generous settlement, NDA, and we'll never speak again. Aladdin was quiet for a long moment. Jasmine could watch the internal calculus happening on his face, $2 million. Versus the effort of maintaining a lie for 8 months. It wasn't a difficult equation. Okay, he said. When do we start? Part 3, The Integration. Presenting Aladdin to her social circle required significant infrastructure. Jasmine hired a personal stylist to ensure his wardrobe transitioned from whatever he'd been wearing to the kind of subtle luxury that communicated wealth without advertising it. She hired a publicist to seed their relationship through the right social media channels, not too obvious, just the kind of organic documentation that real couples generated accidentally. She trained him. Not extensively, because extensive training would have been counterproductive to the entire premise, but Enough that he could navigate the social situations required. What to say when people asked about their relationship. How to describe their meeting without contradicting her version. What topics to avoid that would make him sound like he was faking. The first public appearance was at a gala benefiting the arts, the kind of event where her father's social circle orbited each other like planets checking for collision risks. Aladdin arrived in a car Jasmine had arranged, wearing a suit that cost more than his previous monthly rent, looking moderately panicked. "You're doing great," Jasmine said, taking his arm as they walked through the entrance. "Smile like you're confused but optimistic about it. That's actually your natural expression, so it should be easy." "I'm already panicking," he said. "There's a lot of important people here." "Yes," Jasmine agreed. "And none of them will look beyond surface-level observation. They'll see you, assess whether you fit the framework of acceptable, and move on. Confidence is just the willingness to not care what they think. Try that." He did, or at least he approximated it closely enough that it worked. People greeted Jasmine with the kind of careful politeness that came from respecting her father's wealth, and they greeted Aladdin with the kind of dismissive friendliness that came from assuming he wasn't particularly threatening. Her father, observing from across the room, nodded with the kind of satisfaction that suggested his daughter had at least brought in someone presentable. By the third event, Aladdin had started to relax into the role. By the fifth, he was actually performing it competently. By the eighth, Jasmine found herself occasionally forgetting that the reason he was holding her hand was financial rather than romantic. "You're different when we're not at events," he said one evening. They were in her penthouse, 75th floor of the Sultanate Tower, designed by someone whose primary objective seemed to be demonstrating the relationship between extreme wealth and extreme emptiness. Like, "You're actually kind of funny. You're different than I thought you'd be." "I'm exactly the way I thought I'd be," Jasmine replied. "You just made assumptions based on how I presented at the gala. Most people do." "What are you actually like?" he asked. "I'm a woman who's built a company into one of the most profitable enterprises in our region," Jasmine said. "Who navigates complex financial systems? Who makes decisions that affect thousands of people's employment? Who watched her mother die and decided that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford? That's what I'm actually like." "That sounds exhausting," Aladdin said. "It is," Jasmine agreed. "Which is why I can't afford to develop genuine emotional attachments to people who are fundamentally unreliable." "Am I unreliable?" "You're employed to be available," Jasmine said. "That's not the same thing." But something had shifted in the equation between them. Aladdin started showing up to events with actual effort rather than just compliance. He began asking her questions about business, about decision-making, about the choices she made. He listened when she talked about quarterly projections and market analysis with the kind of attention that suggested something approaching genuine interest. "I'm worried," Jasmine told her assistant, Raja, one afternoon while reviewing contracts. "He's supposed to be performing a role. He seems to be developing actual emotional engagement." "Maybe he's just falling for you," Raja suggested. Raja was the kind of assistant who'd been with her for so long that she'd transcended the category of employee and become something more like a strategic partner who happened to answer phones. "That would be problematic," Jasmine said. "Because my feelings toward him are designed to be conditional and ultimately dismissive." "Are they?" Raja asked. Jasmine didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Part 4, The Decadence. The engagement party was held at a private club overlooking the marina, the kind of establishment that didn't advertise, because everyone who needed to know about it already did. The event existed in a particular dimension of wealth that most people would never encounter: champagne that cost more than monthly salaries, catering provided by a private chef who usually only cooked for royalty, entertainment that consisted of a jazz ensemble who normally performed at international festivals. Jasmine moved through the party in a dress designed specifically for her by a designer who'd never made anything for anyone else, wearing diamonds that had been mined with the kind of ethical disregard that came with extraordinary price tags. She was performing the role of the radiant bride-to-be, and she performed it impeccably because she'd been performing roles her entire life. Aladdin looked out of place and in place simultaneously. He was wearing designer clothing and existing in spaces designed for extraordinary wealth, but something in his bearing suggested he still couldn't quite believe the transition was real. Jasmine found this endearing in a way that was professionally problematic. "You seem happy," her father observed, drawing her aside near the end of the evening. "Genuinely happy. I didn't expect that." "I'm skilled at my work," Jasmine replied. "And this arrangement is one of my most successful projects." "Is he just an arrangement?" her father asked. "Or has something changed?" "The distinction between what's arranged and what's genuine is largely irrelevant," Jasmine said. "I've arranged my entire life. My career, my social circle, my emotional responses. The only thing that changes is whether we acknowledge the arrangement or pretend it wasn't there." Her father smiled. It was a smile that suggested he understood his daughter with a precision that was probably unhealthy. "You're going to be an excellent CEO," he said. Part 5, The Revelation. The wedding happened in autumn, in the gardens of an estate that Jasmine had rented specifically because it communicated the right blend of wealth and cultivated taste. Aladdin looked genuinely beautiful standing at the altar, which was problematic because it made the performance feel too much like reality. The vows were written by her publicist and delivered by both of them with the kind of sincerity that came from understanding they were fundamentally false. Jasmine watched Aladdin's face as he said his vow. And she found herself wondering if he was actually performing anymore or if something in the past 6 months had converted the arrangement into something that resembled actual emotion. The reception lasted until midnight. The wedding night, technically, happened on Jasmine's private beach at a villa she owned on an island in the Seychelles, which meant it happened in the kind of privacy that allowed for actual honesty rather than continued performance. "I'm in love with you," Aladdin said. They were in the main suite of the villa, waves visible through windows the size of buildings, everything around them designed specifically to create the feeling that the world extended only as far as Jasmine's wealth could see. "That's not part of the arrangement," Jasmine said carefully. "I don't care," Aladdin replied. "I know you hired me to fake this. I know the whole thing was designed to get you control of your company. I don't care. I'm in love with you anyway." Jasmine processed this. She'd anticipated many scenarios, that he'd become greedy, that he'd attempt to leverage the arrangement for additional money, that he'd sell the story to tabloids. She hadn't anticipated genuine emotional engagement. "That's not sustainable," she said. "I don't have the capacity for that kind of relationship." "You might," Aladdin said. "If you tried." She kissed him, which was either a profound emotional decision or a very sophisticated way of avoiding having to answer him verbally. Possibly both. Possibly she no longer had the clarity to distinguish between what was strategic and what was genuine. Part 6. The corporate transition. Her father stepped aside exactly as promised. On the morning of her 31st birthday, she'd corrected the age disparity. In her presentation to the public, which everyone accepted without question because that's what people did when wealth was involved, Jasmine became CEO of the Sultanate Corporation. The board of directors applauded. The media celebrated. Stock prices increased on the announcement. The first week was the kind of controlled chaos that came from transitioning any large organization, learning systems, meeting departments, understanding the architecture of decisions that had been made in her absence. Her father had stepped aside but remained as chair of the board, which meant he was still present in strategic decisions while no longer responsible for day-to-day operations. It was her head of security, Abu, who brought the irregularities to her attention. "There's something in the accounts," he said. They were in her private office, behind doors that required biometric access, and contained security measures that would have prevented a reasonable person from even attempting to penetrate them. Small transfers. Nothing that would flag normal audit protocols, but if you're looking for them, they're there. "Show me," Jasmine said. Abu displayed the documents. The pattern took approximately 90 seconds to recognize once she was looking for it. Money being systematically moved through shell accounts, assets being transferred to entities that didn't exist in any official capacity, the kind of sophisticated embezzlement that required access to very particular systems. "Who has the authorization levels required for this?" Jasmine asked. Her voice was remarkably steady given that the answer was becoming increasingly obvious. "Aladdin," Abu said quietly. "He's been added to the executive council by your father. He has access to most systems." Jasmine felt something crystallize in her chest, a particular kind of coldness that came from having made a catastrophic miscalculation about another person. She'd been so focused on managing his emotional development that she hadn't considered whether his emotional development was genuine or performed. "How much?" she asked. "So far?" "Approximately 150 million, Abu said. "But the transfers are accelerating. He's moving more aggressively in the past week. My projection is that he's planning something major. A hostile acquisition is my guess. He's been meeting with foreign investors. He's been positioning himself to take control." Jasmine pulled up her personal communication log. Over the past week, Aladdin had been increasingly distant. Meetings that took him away from the office. Phone calls that he took in private. The behavior she'd attributed to him processing his emotional attachment to her was actually him coordinating an elaborate theft. She called him. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was expecting communication. "We need to talk," she said. "My office. Now." He arrived within 20 minutes, looking remarkably calm given that she was presumably about to confront him about the systematic destruction of their arrangement. She watched as he closed the door behind him and settled into one of her chairs, with the kind of confidence that suggested this conversation wasn't going to go the way she expected. "You know," he sighed. "It wasn't a question." "I know," Jasmine confirmed. "You've stolen approximately $150 million and have been positioning yourself to take control of my company. Using the access I gave you. Using the trust that came from the engagement. Using everything I provided." "Not stole," Aladdin corrected. "Redistributed. And I didn't position myself to take control of your company. I positioned myself to take control of my company. Because that's what it actually is. That's what it's always been." Jasmine felt her expression become very still. "Explain," she said. "Your father," Aladdin said, "hired me 3 years ago. Before you met me at that gala. He told me he was going to groom his daughter for leadership, that he was going to make her think she was in control while actually maintaining control. Through leverage. He hired me to be that leverage. He knew you'd be attracted to the idea of finding an outsider to marry. And he made sure I was the outsider you found." "That's not true," Jasmine said. But even as she said it, she was reassessing the timeline. How her father had seemed unsurprised when she announced she'd marry someone. How he'd seemed amused when she'd said she'd found him at a charity event. The particular way the entire encounter had been orchestrated. "He's currently in a private hospital dealing with stage 4 cancer," Aladdin continued. "He has maybe 8 months left. He wanted to ensure that when he died, control of the company wouldn't fall to you completely. Because he didn't actually think you were capable of running it alone. So he arranged for me to integrate into the power structure. To marry you. To gain access to systems. And to eventually take over." "Why are you telling me this?" Jasmine asked. Her voice was still remarkably steady, which was the only thing preventing her from losing complete control of the situation. "Because I developed genuine feelings for you," Aladdin said. "And I'm telling you this so you understand that it doesn't matter. I'm taking over this company with or without your cooperation. But I wanted you to know why. I wanted you to understand that you weren't wrong about me being a tool. You just didn't understand who was actually wielding me." Part 7, The Precipice. The board meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Aladdin had orchestrated a coup with the kind of clarity that suggested he'd been planning it far longer than Jasmine's tenure as CEO. Investors who'd already been contacted. Board members who'd been promised favorable conditions under new leadership. Regulatory bodies that had been informed of structural irregularities that required immediate board intervention. Jasmine sat in the CEO office that she'd held for exactly 1 week and understood with perfect clarity that she was about to lose control of everything. Her options were theoretically multiple but practically limited. She could expose Aladdin's theft, which would implicate her father in pot. Potentially expose the fraudulent nature of her entire ascension to power. She could resign and maintain what remained of her reputation. She could attempt to countermaneuver, which would require allies she no longer had access to. Raja appeared in her doorway, carrying coffee and a tablet displaying the morning news. "They're announcing the transition after the board meeting," Raja said quietly. "All the major outlets have been prepared. Aladdin is becoming interim CEO pending board ratification. You're being positioned as stepping down for personal reasons." "What time is the meeting?" Jasmine asked. 10 a.m., Raja said. 1 hour. Jasmine looked out the window at the city sprawling beneath her. The view that had seemed to extend so far when she'd inherited the office now seemed very small. "Get me Abu," Jasmine said. "And call my father's hospital. I need to see him before the meeting." Part 8, The Truth Fractures. The hospital room was designed to communicate wealth even in circumstances of extreme illness. Private suite. View of the city. Medical equipment that was cutting edge to the point of being experimental. Her father was awake, which surprised her. She'd expected to find him sedated. "You know," he said. It wasn't a question. About all of it, Jasmine confirmed. The arrangement with Aladdin. The plan to maintain control after you stepped aside. The fact that the entire thing was designed to keep me from actually controlling my own company. That was the idea, Maharaja said. His voice was remarkably steady for someone dying. You're brilliant, Jasmine. Genuinely brilliant. But brilliance isn't always enough. You needed someone to provide structural challenge. To keep you from becoming complacent. I thought Aladdin would be sufficient for that. He's stealing from me, Jasmine said. I know, her father replied. I authorized it. 150 million was supposed to be a test. To see if you'd catch him. To see if you'd respond appropriately. And if I did catch him? Jasmine asked. Then you'd understand that power in a business context isn't something that's given, her father said. It's something that's taken from the people who want to take it from you. From the circumstances that try to constrain you. From everyone who underestimates your capacity for ruthlessness. I can't fight back, Jasmine said. If I expose him, I expose the fraud. If I expose the fraud, the company collapses. If the company collapses, everything I've built is destroyed. Yes, her father said. Welcome to the actual parameters of power. Everything you've learned, everything you've done. Everything you've sacrificed, it's all dependent on maintaining a fiction that people are willing to believe. The moment they stop believing it, everything falls apart. So what do I do? Jasmine asked. Her father smiled. It was a smile that contained satisfaction and something approaching apology. Whatever you think is necessary, he said. You Alwa. YS have been. Part 9, The Board Meeting. The boardroom was designed to communicate authority through architecture, long table, high ceilings, windows that didn't reflect rather than displayed, because even reflections were considered weak in this space. Jasmine arrived precisely on time. Which was a calculated decision. Aladdin was already there, sitting in what was technically still her chair, reviewing documents with the kind of casual competence that suggested he'd already mentally transitioned into his new role. The board members filed in 12 people, including her father's representative, people who'd known her for years and who now looked at her with expressions of sympathetic dismissal. Before we begin the formal agenda, Jasmine said, I'd like to address the board regarding recent irregularities. Aladdin's expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough that she could see the moment of genuine concern cross his face. There have been unauthorized transfers of company ETS, Jasmine continued. Approximately $150 million moved through shell accounts created by executive-level personnel. However, I've determined that the person responsible acted under instructions from higher authority. She pulled up the documentation that Abu had compiled, the authorization records showing her father's involvement, the communications where her father had instructed Aladdin to move the money, the entire architecture of the scheme laid bare for board scrutiny. My father, Jasmine said, authorized the theft to test my competency as CEO. Aladdin was acting as an agent of his will. Both men believed I wouldn't catch the irregularities. Both men were wrong. The boardroom became very quiet. I have 3 proposals, Jasmine continued. First, full recovery of the transferred funds, including assets held by external parties that Aladdin has already begun liquidating. Second, investigation into the scheme conducted by external auditors, who will report to the board rather than to me or my father. Third, structural changes to prevent any individual from maintaining this level of hidden authority over company operations. You're proposing that we criminally prosecute both the chair of the board and the CEO, one of the board members said. Slowly. I'm proposing that the board act in accordance with its fiduciary obligations, Jasmine replied. Which means protecting the company's interests regardless of family relationships. Aladdin stood. His expression had shifted into something that contained genuine rage underneath the carefully maintained performance. You can't, he began. I can, Jasmine said. I've already documented everything. I've already contacted the regulatory authorities. I've already informed external investors who are invested in company stability. You can resign quietly with a confidentiality agreement. Or you can attempt to fight this and watch as everything you've orchestrated collapses in public testimony. Your father, Aladdin started. My father is dying, Jasmine interrupted. And he's dying with the knowledge that his daughter will control this company. Despite his final attempt to undermine her. He'll spend his remaining months processing that failure. Aladdin looked around the boardroom for allies and found none. The board members were already running calculations about exposure and liability. Already determining how to protect themselves while providing the appearance of acting in the company's interest. You're brilliant, Aladdin said quietly. You actually are. That's what makes this so strategic, Jasmine finished. It's strategic. Everything was strategic. Including the part where I made you believe I was vulnerable enough that you could actually hurt me. She paused, and for just a moment, something genuine crossed her expression, something that acknowledged both that she'd cared and that caring had been a calculated risk all along. Security will escort you to your OFFI CE to collect personal items, she continued. You'll have 30 minutes. After that, your access to company systems will be revoked. As Aladdin was led from the room, he turned back one final time. Did you ever actually care about me? He asked. Jasmine considered the question. She considered it with all the care she'd learned to bring to things that mattered. Then she answered honestly. I cared about the version of you I created, she said. I'm not certain that version and the actual you were ever the same person. The door closed behind him, and Jasmine returned her attention to the boardroom, where hostile takeovers and internal betrayals were suddenly looking considerably less appealing when directed at someone who'd anticipated them from the beginning. She'd won, after all. But as she looked around the table at the board members who were already calculating how to use this incident to their advantage, as she thought about her father dying in a hospital bed with the knowledge of his failure, as she considered what kind of person she'd become in pursuit of control, she wondered if victory had actually cost her everything she'd been trying to protect. The city spread out beneath the windows, and Jasmine sat alone at the head of the table, suddenly aware that she'd successfully conquered everything except the part that actually mattered. And now she had no idea how to fix that.
That's a wrap on today's story. If this tale pulled you in like it did me, smash that like button and subscribe for more short stories every week. What should read next? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep those pages turning. Quote.